Tango dancers are like cats, elegant, mysterious, easily offended. I have never heard so much complaining about any dance scene as much as I've heard complaining about tango dancers. Tango dancers are considered to be some of the least friendly dancers on the dance scene. If you are a beginner coming in or new to the scene and you know other dance forms, but you decide to try a milonga and you come in, it's very easy to offend somebody without really even knowing it. You might be going in with the best of intentions and want to connect with people and be friendly. And you might be met with a coldness and maybe even rejection. There are a lot of rules and a lot of etiquette that you have to learn right away when you first start going to the milonga. Because if you don't follow those rules, very easily you'll find yourself in a position of being ignored by a lot of people. And it doesn't feel very good to sort of feel like an outsider and realize that you just don't know what everybody is expecting of you. Now, January typically is the month for a lot of growth in tango because a lot of people start tango in January and some sort of a tango boot camp or in some sort of a beginner tango series. And there's been a lot of discussion around the fact that most people who start in January don't actually make it very far. A lot of the people who start quit very quickly. And of those who stick around, many of those dancers don't actually progress to the level of social dancing for many months and maybe even years. I've heard from dancers around the world who actually feel very intimidated to go to the milonga and they just attend classes feeling like at some point they're going to be ready to go, but it's just not yet. They're not ready to go to a milonga. As a beginner, you might fall into that trap thinking, I need to learn this much vocabulary before I go to the milonga. I need to be of a certain level. But I think all of us unconsciously are just anxious about the possibility of going to the milonga and embarrassing ourselves by making certain mistakes that we don't know we're making. I have definitely felt this kind of thing growing up as an immigrant and being new to the country as a child, being in the United States. I often felt so afraid of being embarrassed because I didn't understand something in the language or I didn't understand a joke. So it drove me to be extremely introverted and not speak up and not talk much because I was just so afraid of making a mistake. And I think there's a certain level of that going into tango for people that you just don't want to end up feeling like a fool, right? You don't want to feel like you don't know what's happening and embarrass yourself. So today in this episode, I want to talk about the most common ways people unintentionally might offend tango dancers and, things that might seem pretty innocent, but ultimately might make you an instant pariah and cut off a lot of the possibilities right away. So these, I hope, will be helpful for you to prevent some of the more uncomfortable situations that happen in tango. Now, how bad can it really get when you go to a milonga as a beginner? Spoken about experiences here and there that dancers have had where people were generally unfriendly. But from time to time, it is possible to experience a very harsh encounter with someone. And I was reminded of this because one of my students just came back from Buenos Aires and he's a beginner. And I would say he's a very solid, enjoyable beginner. And I would be happy to dance with someone like that at a milonga. But he said that at one of the milongas, a woman that he was dancing with walked off the dance floor within 30 seconds of taking the embrace. And she said to his face in Spanish, "You don't know how to dance." And she walked off. That hurts. That situation hopefully does not happen to anyone ever. But if it does, just know that it's not you. A lot of times it's just the context, the particular type of dancers that you're around, the particular type of milonga. Just take it with a grain of salt. Whatever negative experience you might get right away, don't let that color your opinion or your perception of tango as a whole, because that's definitely a very extreme case. Let's start talking about the top ways to offend tango dancers. I'm going to lead with a really funny one that might not be as relevant once you're dancing tango, but I think this one you come across quite a bit when you travel, perhaps, or you talk to people who don't dance tango. So you should let me know in the comments whether you've ever experienced this situation as a tango dancer. You say to someone that you dance tango, and they say one of two things: I dance ballroom too, or I know someone who dances ballroom, or I've done ballroom. So that's one thing that they'll say. Or they'll say something like, oh, I love dancing with the stars. So those are the two top things, top cultural references that people have when tango is mentioned. And both of those feel like a little bit of an insult to tango dancers, and not like in a way that would make somebody really upset, but it kind of makes us roll our eyes, right? And it's also when somebody's like, oh, yeah, I love all the Latin dances. I love salsa. I love bachata. And as a tango dancer, most of the time, you want to say, no, that it's different. It's totally different, because tango is so different, but there's no like way of describing it. So it's a little bit of an annoying thing, I think, when people assume that tango is ballroom. To me, it's annoying because it shows that tango still doesn't stand on its own in the cultural zeitgeist. It stands as part of ballroom, as a collection of dances. So people don't yet know that it's its own dance. But let's move on to the more relevant pieces, more relevant ways that you can offend tango dancers. And I'm going to start but the one that's really across the board is going to be your number one element that you want to watch out for. Because if you don't follow cabeceo, you will offend a lot of people, and you will offend them without even knowing that you offended them. Now, there's lots of reasons why somebody might not follow the rules of cabeceo. Number one is that you might not know what it is. But another very common reason is that you might think that it's a silly tradition, that it's cumbersome. And why are we doing it? Why are we not just coming up to each other and being human and talking to each other? Like, there's a lot of dancers who come in on the scene, and they'll rightfully so say, like, why do I have to do all of this? So instead, they'll opt for just coming up to people and asking them to dance. A lot of times it's with an outstretched hand even. And maybe they won't get rejected a lot. Maybe certain people will go ahead and dance with those kinds of dancers, but a lot of times you will not be considered a good dancer because you don't follow the cabeceo, and a lot of dancers will start ignoring you. Whether that's wrong or right, I don't want to get into that, but that's just the way it is. So I'm giving you kind of a sense of what to watch out for. Like, now, when it comes to like not following the rules of cabeceo, not only will you offend the person that you're targeting, but you'll also offend people around you. Like, other people are watching you. Other leaders are watching you. So nobody might say anything, but it's definitely on their radar. For me, some of the worst cabeceo faux pas would be something like coming up to the follower with your hand actually outstretched and verbally inviting. Like, that's automatically kind of considered very poor form, because it puts the follower in an awkward position. A lot of times they don't feel comfortable saying no. And then the follower feels obligated to dance with you. And then other people are seeing all of that. Also, one thing that you don't want to do is, if you're dancing with somebody and you finish a tanda, walk off the floor before asking someone else to dance. Because you want to complete the full experience that you just had with the person that you danced with before you start asking someone. I've had certain leaders who are obviously beginner leaders, because if you're experienced, I don't think you'd ever do that. But I would be finishing up a tanda where the cortina is playing, and I'm just walking off the dance floor with someone, and a leader just runs up to me and like verbally asks me to dance the next tanda. Most people won't want to agree to that because, number one, they haven't finished what they just started. They're walking off the dance floor. It's not considered done yet. And then also, you don't know what the music is going to be. You don't know what the next tanda is. And I guarantee you, if you ask a follower, if you cabeceo a follower that you don't know before a tanda starts, that's automatically marks you as an inexperienced dancer because the whole point is that you wait for the tanda to start to know who you want to dance with. Now, as a beginner, of course, you might not. And you're thinking, I better get this dancer before anybody else. And you want to like beat them to the punch. But you want to wait until the tanda starts to acknowledge them and to cabeceo them rather than starting the cabeceo right after the other tanda finished and the cortina is still playing. Now, I know that this is mostly applying to the leaders, but I do see certain followers, new followers who are coming in from other dance scenes where the etiquette is very different. They might also feel like, why am I sitting here waiting? I'm just going to get up and I'm going to start asking leaders to dance with me. I've had women tell me that that's their strategy, that if they don't get asked, they just start getting up and asking men to dance with them. Now, first of all, I love the idea of that much confidence for any woman because I think we're very much behind on the confidence level in this way as women. So it's good to feel like you can really ask for what you want. But at the same time, you want to be mindful that other people are seeing this kind of disrespect of the etiquette, I would say. Like that's how they would see that. They wouldn't see that as, oh, this person, nobody's dancing with them, and therefore they have the right to go ahead and ask. They would perceive it as, you're disrespecting the etiquette. You're not playing by the rules. And whether or not that's correct or it isn't, doesn't matter. What matters is you're in a milonga. And if you're doing that, people might automatically decide not to dance with you or not to interact with you because they see you doing that. So it's a little bit of a difficult conundrum because the argument that a lot of beginners or newcomers have, and I agree with this, is like, well, if I'm not getting the dances, how am I going to dance if I don't proactively do something? So, of course, that's a challenging situation to be in. And that's kind of everybody has to deal with that when they first come into tango. Now, of course, some of you might be like, but wait, I see people doing that all the time. I see people just verbally ask someone or reach their hand out and everybody's fine with it. So there are situations where you find yourself being able to break the etiquette. And it definitely depends on you knowing the people that you're around. So you'll notice that people who already know each other, they're friends. And if you've danced with this person multiple times, you've had multiple conversations, of course, it's not going to be as dramatic if you actually verbally ask them. Now, sometimes, there's still a gray area, and I still like to, as much as possible, practice cabeceo, even with people that I know closely, because you never know. Sometimes that person might not want to dance with you just for other reasons. And it's not good to just expect that they're going to say yes. So I still like to practice the cabeceo, but there is that little bit of gray area, that exception to the rule, that the etiquette is a bit more relaxed once you actually know the people. And that is basically the answer to how do you move through this challenging period when you're first starting and you might not know the etiquette very well, but you need to get dances, and really focus on connecting with the dancers themselves and building those relationships. And that will automatically help in so many ways because those people can help you learn the etiquette, and they're the ones who might forgive your inexperience and dance with you, even if you ask them verbally. So that kind of a lot of times gives you a bit more leeway when people actually know who you are. Now, the next piece that you want to consider if you are looking to offend or not offend tango dancers, think about Floorcraft for sure. Floorcraft is the next level of, I would say, sensitivity that tango dancers have. There's a lot of opinions and rules about the floor etiquette, about the line of dance. And the more respect you can have for those rules, the better you will do in the long run. Sometimes it feels very tedious, I know, but I think overall, the etiquette that is developed around the dance floor serves the purpose of everyone moving as seamlessly as possible without hurting each other. That's kind of the goal of it. So, one of the major things is staying in your lane. When you are dancing in a crowded milonga, the dance floor will hopefully have clear lanes. Sometimes that doesn't happen when you don't have enough dancers who can actually keep a lane, but most of the time, there will be two or three lanes that form that are dancing side by side. And you want to be really mindful that you don't switch lanes and you don't slow down the lane. That's really a big one because when you're dancing at first, you're thinking a lot about figures and you're trying to figure out where your body goes and your partner's body. And you're kind of looking more inside the bubble of you and your partner. And so you can lose track of how far you've gone and whether you've stopped the flow. So sometimes if you see more space in front of you than behind you, that's a huge signal that you need to keep moving forward. If you don't, you might not even know, but five couples down the line, somebody is complaining and talking about you. Also, a good thing not to do, and I'm guilty of this, is when the song starts, a lot of times we're chit chatting. The longer you chit chat, just be mindful the person behind you is waiting for you to move. And a lot of times you'll see if they get frustrated with you, they'll pass you. And if you see that, a lot of times that's a sign that they just got upset at how long they had to wait. I know this because this happened to me the other day. So you want to be mindful. So staying in your lane, equidistant from the couple in front of you and behind you, and making sure that you don't switch lanes. Once you're in one lane, just keep going in that lane. Now, when are the times that you could not obey this rule? If you're dancing next to someone who is moving too much and sort of taking up a lot of space and you're kind of afraid that you're going to run into them and you need to move to a different lane because you need more space, go ahead and move to a different lane. Also, when there's not as much traffic, like if the floor is not very crowded, if you're at a practica and it's a bit more relaxed atmosphere, it's not as a big of a deal if you switch lanes, but still, as much as possible, train it in yourself to be consistently walking on the line of dance. It's just a really good skill to hone, no matter whether you have a lot of space or not. So the next way tango dancers get really offended is if they see any teaching going on the dance floor at a milonga. Teaching at a milonga in general is not allowed. It's considered very poor form, even if it's in the context of like, this is a teacher and a student and they're coming to dance together and work on something and they're just working with each other. Even in that context, it's just not the place for that kind of thing to be happening. So be mindful of that because even if you yourself are actually asking someone to give you feedback, if they start giving you feedback, other people hear it. They notice it. They know that it's happening. And the fact that it's happening on a milonga dance floor automatically means something to people about your level and who you are. So I would stray away from giving feedback on the dance floor at the milonga. But also, if you're a follower and you're dancing with somebody who offers feedback, who just starts giving you feedback without you even asking for it, that is definitely a red flag. And you do need to get offended and you do need to ask them to, to stop. So just know that as a beginner, just because you might not be seasoned and you don't know a lot of things, it does not mean that somebody has the right to start teaching you on the dance floor at a milonga. Now, again, there are exceptions to this. Maybe you're at a local milonga that's a very casual, once a week milonga, and everybody knows everyone. And you bring a friend with you and you just want to introduce them to the community and everybody's sort of on board with it. Like that's a very different context. All right. Now, this next one is very specific. As a leader, going out on the dance floor, the first song with the person that you don't know, If you start leading a lot of leg wraps and kicks and big embellishments, that is a huge way that you can offend your partner. Because for me, if I meet somebody for the first time and we dance, I still need to get to know who you are. I need to just walk. I need to figure out what your musicality is. Leg wraps and anything to do with like bigger, more sensual movements that are considered part of the advanced vocabulary. A lot of times leaders have this perception that that's what followers like. They like those kinds of movements. And if you do them, that means it's an advanced dancer situation. But it's actually the opposite. If I dance with somebody who within 10 seconds gives me a leg wrap, I know that I'm never going to dance with them again because it's too much for me. I feel like I need a bit more time before I commit to an intimate move like that. Plus, especially if it doesn't fit in the music, which most of the time, the way the songs are constructed, very rarely are you going to have something that calls for such big movements right away in the beginning of the song. So it sort of marks you as a beginner in many ways, but it also creates a feeling that you're not very sensitive to the follower. Now, of course, from the leader's perspective, they're just trying to give me more. They're nervous. Maybe they're trying to make sure I'm entertained. They want to make sure they look good and they show their skills. It might come from a good place. But even though it comes from a very innocent place, you might be offending the other person and you might not even know. The only way you'll really learn that they're offended, possibly, is that they'll start ignoring you and they won't dance with you again. So it's something to really keep in mind as you start going out. So this one was particularly for leaders on a dance floor, but for followers, there's another big mistake that you can make that will offend a lot of dancers on the dance floor, not just your partner. And that is over embellishing. Over embellishing covers a range of movements, but anything to do with a lot of foot taps or kicks or high boleos. I would say high boleos are probably the number one offender. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard of people getting kicked by someone's high boleo and how much people wish that dancers would stop doing boleos high off the ground. It's a constant reminder to me how much it can disrupt the dance floor because when you're kicking your leg, you're assuming that your leader knows where you are on the dance floor. You assume that they have the space because they let it, right? But a lot of times they don't know. They don't perhaps know or have the skills to navigate well. So they're leading the boleo when they shouldn't be. But then for you to also be mindful that you're dancing around other people as well. Now, I know that's hard to keep track of, right? Because when we take the embrace, as a follower, you just close your eyes and then you're gone. You're like in your own little world. You don't even remember what's around you or where you are in the room. But somehow we need to be mindful as followers, as we are in this seventh heaven dimension of bliss. Even in that place, we need to somehow keep track of the fact that, okay, I'm around other people, furniture, things around me. So embellishments should be done with care when appropriate, when you have the space. And especially when it comes to high boleos, number one, you really need to learn the technique for the high boleo in a crowded space. There's a way to do it. There's definitely very good technique to do it in a way that doesn't disrupt anything, but you need to make sure you learn it and you know how to do it. And secondly, that you know how to not do it off the floor, that your dance is not just doing the boleo the same way, which is a very common mistake for followers. And some leaders get really offended when you take off and do your own thing. And they will say that it feels like you're just dancing on your own. You're not dancing with them, you're dancing in your own little world. And I know that there's some leaders who are very generous and they're sort of like okay with it. But most leaders, they would prefer that they would be a little bit more minimized. I would say they like it when there's a bit more consideration, let's say, that it's not just fully autopilot embellishments all the time. But there's also cases when leaders really, really dislike it. I've heard of instances when leaders walked off the dance floor from a follower because they felt that the follower was too active, too much embellishing. Now, of course, there's a spectrum, and we can argue for a long time how much is appropriate when it comes to embellishing. But what you need to know really is that there's a spectrum of leaders out there with their preferences. And as you take the embrace with the leader, the question right away for you is to feel, what does this leader want? What kind of connection are they offering? Sometimes I dance with the leader, and the way they hold me, I can tell they don't want me to embellish at all. They want me to just do what they're leading. And other times I can tell it's the opposite. So the lesson here is that you want to be sensitive. You want to be open to suggestion. You want to be open to doing things differently with each person rather than doing the thing that you learned in class, the way they taught it in class, and the way you drilled that baleo 100,000 times. And now you're going to do that baleo every time. So you want to watch out for those kinds of tendencies. And, I haven't mentioned this too, but for followers, something to think about. It's not just that your partner and the people around you are sensitive to the fact that you're kicking your baleos off the floor, but there's people watching you off the sidelines and they're talking about it. I guarantee it. There's always that element at tango where if somebody's not respecting the space and respecting the etiquette, it stands out and people will notice it and they will, make up their minds based on that. For me, if I see somebody like that who's doing a lot of embellishments and just dancing kind of in their own little world, to me, I note that. And most of the time, I will steer clear of that. Now, of course, as with everything, I'm going to say there are exceptions to the rule. There are times when you can embellish and you can do a lot of high boleos. Again, it depends on the context. Sometimes you are in a very sparsely attended milonga in the middle of the week, or it's a practica. There's a lot of space and it's sort of nuevo style night and there's a lot of alt music. That space kind of facilitates that exploration. And so you might find yourself that, yeah, you can do those kinds of movements and embellish to your heart's content. But again, it will depend on where you're dancing. So as long as you're sensitive to your environment and kind of appreciate the rules of the game as you see them played out, that will give you the confidence to know which one to do when. I have one more example to talk about of a way that tango dancers get offended. I'm realizing that this one offends me personally. And that is when leaders get on the dance floor and they don't make eye contact with the leaders that are dancing on the dance floor before entering. So the rule, the etiquette is that whenever you enter the dance floor, you want to lock eyes with the leader who's about to be behind you and wait for their nod. And once the nod comes, that means, okay, they know that you're there and they've agreed to you entering. Most of the time these days, people are unaware, perhaps, that that's an etiquette and they just kind of ignore both when I'm dancing, they ignore my invitation to look at me before they enter, or when I'm entering, a lot of times I'm trying to look at the leader and they're not looking my way because they're just kind of in their own little world. Again, pretty innocent. There's many reasons why the other person might not look at you. Maybe they just forgot or they're just not noticing you. It's not necessarily a huge deal. I'm not going to be mad forever, but it is one of those ways, subtle ways that I or other tango dancers can get a little offended the way a cat gets offended from being touched the wrong way on the wrong day. So what else do you think offends tango dancers? I want to know if my list has encompassed all of the ways that tango dancers get offended. Or do you think there's other things that we're particularly sensitive about? I want to hear from you. Pop those into the comments or share with me on my social at I'm So Tango. You can find me on Instagram. And if you haven't done so already, I invite you to join my private Facebook group where I do live banters every Friday, and you can join the conversation there. So check out the link in the show notes for that. We'll continue the banter next week. Until then, ciao.